So let me get this straight, I said, squinting at the purple-skinned alien diplomat who looked like someone had crossed a squid with a middle manager. You want to conduct a mental compatibility assessment by literally touching my brain? Ambassador Vel'thara. And yes, that's pronounced exactly like it's spelled, with all the pretentious apostrophes, nodded solemnly with what I assumed was her head. Hard to tell when you're dealing with something that looks like it escaped from a cosmic seafood buffet. It is standard protocol for all species seeking membership in the Galactic Federation, she explained in that weird harmony-singing voice that sounded like wind chimes having an argument. The Zephyrian mind touch allows us to assess cognitive compatibility, emotional stability, and, how do you say, mental hygiene. Mental hygiene. Right. Because apparently, even aliens were concerned about whether humans had properly washed their thoughts before coming to the intergalactic dinner party. I was sitting in what Earth's finest diplomatic minds had generously called a conference room, but which looked suspiciously like a converted janitor's closet in the basement of the UN building. The fluorescent lights flickered with the enthusiasm of a dying fish, and the whole place smelled like industrial-strength disinfectant and broken dreams. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Earth's lead xenopsychologist, yes, that's apparently a real job now, was practically vibrating with excitement in the corner. She'd been studying alien psychology for all of 3 months, ever since first contact, and was about as qualified as I was to perform brain surgery. Which is to say, not at all. This is a tremendous opportunity, Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, she whispered loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. The Zephyrians are the Federation's premier telepathic species. Their mental abilities are legendary. Yeah, legendary. Like the Titanic was legendary. Some legends you really don't want to be part of. And I was chosen for this honor because, I asked, though I already knew the answer. When you're the only military officer dumb enough to volunteer for exotic cultural exchange programs, read alien weirdness, you tend to get picked for all the jobs nobody else wants. Because you have the highest psychological resilience scores in your military, Vel'thara said, consulting what looked like a tablet made of crystallized starlight. Show off. Also, your file indicates an unusually high tolerance for, how do you say, bullshit? I blinked. My file says that? Not in those exact words, Dr. Hartwell interjected quickly. It says you have exceptional adaptability to non-standard operational parameters. Which, when you think about it, is really just a fancy way of saying I'm good at dealing with bullshit. The alien wasn't wrong. Look, I said, leaning back in my chair, which creaked ominously. I've jumped out of perfectly good airplanes, eaten MREs that were older than some of my recruits, and once spent 3 weeks in a foxhole with a guy who thought personal hygiene was a communist conspiracy. I think I can handle one alien poking around in my head for a few minutes. Famous last words right there. If you ever find yourself saying something that confident before letting an alien mess with your brain, maybe reconsider your life choices. Vel'thara's tentacle fingers, tentaclers? That should be a word. Writhed in what I was beginning to recognize as amusement. Your species' confidence is refreshing. Most beings are significantly more apprehensive about mental contact. Most beings probably have more sense, I muttered. The ambassador glided closer. And I mean glided. Apparently, the Zephyrians didn't believe in walking like civilized people. She just sort of floated over the floor like someone had put a jellyfish in a business suit and taught it about interstellar diplomacy. The process is quite simple, she explained, raising one of her many appendages. I will place my hand upon your forehead, establish a mental link, and conduct a brief survey of your consciousness. It should take no more than a few moments. Dr. Hartwell was taking notes frantically, like she was about to witness the scientific discovery of the century, which, to be fair, she probably was, though not in the way she expected. Any side effects I should know about? I asked, because I'm not completely stupid, just mostly stupid. Some mild disorientation is normal. Occasionally, subjects report temporary synesthesia or brief episodes of linguistic confusion. Nothing permanent or dangerous. Right, because when has an alien ever lied about the side effects of their weird space technology? I'm sure the Zephyrian equivalent of pharmaceutical commercials are just as honest as ours. May cause mild disorientation and the occasional existential crisis. Do not operate heavy machinery or participate in intergalactic warfare while under the influence of alien mind touch. Side effects may include, but are not limited to, temporary blindness, speaking in tongues, or the sudden ability to see through the lies of politicians. But hey, I'd signed up for this job. Time to earn my pay. All right, I said, settling back in my chair and trying to look more confident than I felt. Let's get this over with. Vel'thara approached with the kind of ceremonious gravity usually reserved for religious ceremonies or really expensive wine tastings. Her tentacle hand thing hovered just inches from my forehead, and I could feel a weird tingling sensation, like static electricity, but more purple? If that makes sense. Which it doesn't, but nothing about this situation made sense anyway. Relax your mind, she instructed. Allow your thoughts to flow naturally. Do not attempt to guide or control the process. Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one about to have an alien octopus rifling through her mental filing cabinets. The moment her appendage made contact with my skin, everything went sideways. I mean that literally. My vision tilted 90 degrees to the left, colors started tasting like Tuesday, and I could suddenly hear the color blue having a heated argument with the concept of mathematics. Which was weird because usually blue and math get along great, but that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was what happened to Vel'thara. The moment our minds connected, she let out a sound like a freight train full of dying dolphins crashing into a factory that manufactured pure terror. Her entire body went rigid. Her skin shifted from purple to a color that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist in normal reality. And she started vibrating like a tuning fork that had been struck by lightning. "What in the name of the cosmic void?" she screamed. Though whether she was screaming out loud or directly into my brain, I couldn't tell. The line between hearing and thinking had gotten a bit blurry. Then she just collapsed, dropped like a sack of purple potatoes, tentacles twitching in what I really hoped was unconsciousness and not some kind of alien seizure. Dr. Hartwell immediately rushed over, medical scanner in hand, while I sat there wondering if I'd just accidentally committed some kind of interstellar war crime. "What happened?" Hartwell asked, running her scanner over the prostrate alien. "Her neural activity is completely chaotic. It's like her brain is trying to process 17 different realities at once." I shrugged, which was about all I could manage given that my head still felt like someone had used it as a piñata at a disco ball factory. She touched my forehead, screamed something about cosmic voids, and then did her impression of a fainting goat. "This is unprecedented," Hartwell muttered, taking readings faster than a teenager texting. "The Zephyrians have conducted thousands of these assessments. Nothing like this has ever happened before." "Yeah, well, nothing like humans had happened before either. We tend to be special that way." It took about 10 minutes for Vel'thara to regain consciousness, during which time I discovered that alien diplomatic incidents generate paperwork at roughly the same rate as nuclear reactions generate energy. Dr. Hartwell had already filled out forms I didn't even know existed, and somewhere in the building, I could hear people running around and shouting in at least 3 different languages. When Vel'thara finally opened her eyes, all 6 of them, because of course she had 6 eyes, she looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "You," she whispered, pointing a shaky tentacle in my direction. What are you?" "Human," I said helpfully. "Homo sapiens, from Earth, 3rd rock from the sun. We've been over this." "No." She struggled to sit up, still looking like she'd seen the galactic equivalent of Cthulhu doing taxes. "What I experienced in your mind, it was not the consciousness of any sentient species I have ever encountered." Dr. Hartwell leaned forward eagerly. "What did you see? What was different?" Vel'thara was quiet for a long moment, presumably trying to figure out how to explain whatever cosmic horror she'd encountered in the suburbs of my consciousness. "Your species," she said finally, "thinks in chaos." "Come again?" "Most sentient minds," she explained, her voice still shaky, "operate on patterns of logic, emotion, and instinct. Predictable patterns. The Zephyrian mind touch works by identifying these patterns and assessing their compatibility with Federation standards." She paused, looking at me like I was some kind of fascinating but potentially dangerous zoo exhibit. "But human minds, they do not follow patterns. They create new patterns, constantly. Every thought spawns 17 different tangential thoughts. Every emotion connects to memories, which connect to random observations, which connect to completely unrelated philosophical concepts. It is like trying to map a storm that is simultaneously a library, a battlefield, and a comedy show." I considered this. "That actually sounds about right, yeah." "And the content," she continued, shuddering. "The random information your species stores in its collective unconscious. Do you realize that within the first 3 seconds of mental contact, I was exposed to the complete lyrics to something called Never Gonna Give You Up, the mathematical proof for why pineapple does not belong on pizza, 17 different conspiracy theories about whether birds are real, and a detailed mental catalog of every embarrassing thing you have ever done since the age of 7. Sounds like you got the full human experience, I said, though I'm a little insulted that my brain rickrolled an alien diplomat. Dr. Hartwell was scribbling notes so fast her pen was smoking. This is incredible. The human mind operates on quantum consciousness principles, non-linear, multidimensional thought processing. No wonder the standard assessment protocols failed. Failed? Vel'thara looked like she was about to faint again. Dr. Hartwell, I did not fail to assess his mental compatibility. I succeeded beyond my wildest nightmares. The human mind is not just compatible with Federation standards. It exceeds them by several orders of magnitude. Your species thinks in ways that shouldn't be possible according to everything we know about consciousness and cognition. She struggled to her feet, still looking distinctly green around the gills, or whatever aliens have instead of gills. I need to contact the Federation Council immediately, she said. This changes everything. Changes what, exactly? I asked, though I was starting to get a sinking feeling about the answer. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, she said, fixing me with all 6 of her eyes. Your species doesn't need to apply for Federation membership. Based on what I experienced in your mind, humanity qualifies for immediate elevation to Class 7 galactic civilization status. Dr. Hartwell dropped her pen. Class 7? But we've barely achieved interplanetary travel. Class 7 status is not based on technological advancement, Vel'thara explained. It is based on cognitive complexity and adaptability. Most species reach Class 7 status after thousands of years of mental evolution. Humans appear to have been born at Class 7. I was starting to get a headache that had nothing to do with alien mind touch, and everything to do with the implications of what she was saying. So, I said slowly, you're telling me that humans are naturally smarter than most aliens? Not smarter, Vel'thara corrected. More complex. Your minds operate on levels of cognitive sophistication that most species cannot even comprehend, let alone achieve. The Zephyrians, for example, have 3 distinct thought processes: logic, emotion, and instinct. Humans appear to have... Well, we are not entirely certain how many thought processes you have, because they all seem to be running simultaneously. She paused, looking thoughtful. It is rather like the difference between a calculator and a quantum computer. Both can solve mathematical problems, but they operate on completely different principles. Great, I muttered. So we're the quantum computers of consciousness. No pressure there. Dr. Hartwell, meanwhile, had apparently gotten over her shock and moved into full scientific excitement mode. This explains so much. Human creativity, our ability to make intuitive leaps, our talent for problem-solving through seemingly random connections. We're not just thinking differently, we're thinking on a fundamentally higher level. Higher might not be the correct term, Vel'thara said carefully. More accurate would be to say that human consciousness operates in more dimensions than most species. Where we think in straight lines, you think in spirals. Where we process information sequentially, you process it holographically. I held up a hand. Okay, time out. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You touched my brain, got overwhelmed by the sheer chaos of human consciousness, and now you're telling me that this chaos is actually a sign that we're mental super beings? In the most basic terms, yes. And this qualifies us for some kind of advanced alien club membership? The Galactic Federation consists of over 2,000 member species, Vel'thara explained. Of those, only 37 have achieved Class 7 status. Most take millennia to develop the cognitive complexity required. Humans appear to have achieved it naturally as part of your evolutionary process. Dr. Hartwell was practically bouncing in her chair. We need to run more tests! We need to understand the mechanisms behind human cognitive complexity. This could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. Actually, Vel'thara said, that might not be advisable. We both looked at her. Why not? Hartwell asked. Because, the alien diplomat said slowly, based on what I experienced in Lieutenant Colonel Brooks's mind, I am not entirely certain that human consciousness operates according to the laws of physics as we understand them. There was a long silence while we all processed that statement. Come again? I said. During the mind touch, I accessed memories, thoughts, and cognitive processes that should not be possible given the limitations of organic neural networks. Your brain appears to be processing information from sources that, well, that should not exist. Such as parallel universes, for one thing. Your unconscious mind seems to have access to information from alternate versions of reality. Not all the time, and not consciously, but it is there. It is how you make those intuitive leaps that seem to come from nowhere. They are actually coming from somewhere else. Specifically, from versions of yourself in realities where you already know the answer. I stared at her. You're telling me that humans are accidentally psychic? Not psychic in the traditional sense, more like quantum entangled with alternate versions of themselves across multiple realities. It is the only way to explain the cognitive processing power I observed. Dr. Hartwell looked like she was about to hyperventilate. This is impossible. This violates everything we know about neuroscience, quantum mechanics, and basic physics. Yes, Vel'thara agreed. Which is why the Federation Council is going to be very interested in meeting with your species. And also why they are going to be absolutely terrified. Terrified? I asked. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, in the past 50,000 years, the Federation has encountered exactly 3 species with Class 7 cognitive abilities. 2 of them ascended to higher dimensions and stopped interacting with physical reality entirely. The third one? Well, the third one accidentally destroyed their home galaxy while trying to solve a particularly difficult mathematical equation. Ah. I was quiet for a moment. And you think humans might be capable of similar mishaps? I think, Vel'thara said carefully, that human consciousness operates on principles that we do not understand and cannot predict, which means that anything is possible, including things that should not be possible. This was about the point where the conversation took a turn for the surreal. Which, given that we were already discussing quantum consciousness and accidental galaxy destruction, was really saying something. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Vel'thara said, I need to report to the Federation Council that Earth's application for membership has been accelerated. You will be granted immediate Class 7 status, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. And what exactly does that mean? It means, she said, that humanity is now officially recognized as one of the galaxy's most cognitively advanced species. You will have access to advanced Federation technology, scientific databases, and interstellar commerce networks. You will also be expected to contribute to Federation research and development programs. Dr. Hartwell's eyes lit up. What kind of research? Problem solving, primarily. The Federation faces challenges that require cognitive approaches beyond what most species can provide. With human consciousness operating on quantum principles, you may be able to solve problems that have stumped us for centuries. What kind of problems? I asked, though I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Well, Vel'thara said thoughtfully, there is the issue of the Andromeda Galaxy's gradual phase shift into a parallel dimension. Our best scientists have been working on it for 300 years with no success. Also, we have been trying to establish diplomatic contact with a species of sentient mathematics from the Magellanic Clouds, but they only communicate through theoretical equations that give most beings severe headaches just looking at them. Sentient mathematics, I repeated. Yes, they appear to be living geometric proofs. Quite friendly, from what we can tell, but impossible to communicate with using normal language. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. And you think humans can solve these problems? I think, Vel'thara said, that human minds are weird enough to have a chance. Which, when you think about it, is probably the most accurate description of humanity that any alien has ever come up with. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and increasingly frantic government officials trying to figure out what to do with the news that humanity had just been promoted to cosmic significance. Doctor! Hartwell disappeared into a flurry of scientific conferences. Vel'thara spent most of her time on what I assumed were interstellar phone calls, though they sounded more like whale songs mixed with dial-up internet. And I sat in the corner wondering how my quiet military career had suddenly turned into a cosmic comedy. Around hour 3 of, wait while the adults figure out how to handle this, Vel'thara approached me again. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, she said, I have a question. Shoot. During the mind touch, I observed something unusual. Your consciousness appeared to be simultaneously aware of multiple probability streams, potential futures and alternate presents. Is this normal for humans? I reflected on this. You mean like when you're trying to decide what to have for lunch, and you can sort of imagine how each choice would play out? No, she said slowly. I mean like being simultaneously aware of 17 different versions of this conversation, each with slightly different outcomes, and unconsciously selecting responses based on which probability stream leads to the most favorable results. I stared at her. That's not normal? Not for any species I have ever encountered, no. Huh. I mulled this over. I always just thought that was how thinking worked. You know, like how you can sort of feel when someone's about to say something before they say it. Or how you know which elevator is going to arrive first. Or how you can tell when your phone is about to ring. Vel'thara's skin had gone pale purple. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, those are all examples of precognitive awareness. Precognitive awareness? The ability to perceive future events before they occur. I shrugged. I thought that was just paying attention. No, she said faintly. That is a psychic ability that most species spend centuries trying to develop. And you think it is just paying attention. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds way more impressive than it actually is. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, Vel'thara said very carefully. Are there any other abilities that you consider normal which might actually be evidence of advanced consciousness? I weighed this question. Well, there's the thing where you can tell what someone's feeling just by looking at them, and the way you can sometimes know things without knowing how you know them. Oh, and that thing where you get hunches about stuff and they turn out to be right way more often than they should be statistically. Those, she said, are empathic awareness, intuitive knowledge transfer, and probability manipulation. They are? Yes, and they are all abilities that the Federation considers to be signs of highly advanced consciousness. So you're telling me that the stuff humans think of as common sense is actually evidence that we're secretly mental super beings? I am telling you, Vel'thara said, that what humans think of as common sense would be considered miraculous by most of the galaxy. Which was about when I started to understand why she'd screamed and passed out when she touched my brain. If our normal, everyday thinking processes were that weird from a galactic perspective, then the full chaotic glory of human consciousness probably looked like something out of a cosmic horror story. No wonder you fainted, I said. I did not faint, she said with as much dignity as a purple tentacle person could muster. I experienced a temporary systems overload due to exposure to incomprehensible cognitive architecture. Right. You fainted. I prefer temporarily overwhelmed by the majesty of human consciousness. That's a very diplomatic way of saying you fainted. The research team arrived 2 days later, and they were exactly as weird as you'd expect from a group of alien scientists who had come to study human consciousness. There was Dr. Zixandra, a crystalline being who communicated through color changes and looked like someone had taught a chandelier to think. Professor Quillmorth, who appeared to be made entirely of floating geometric shapes held together by what I can only describe as academic smugness. And Commander Thrax, a being that looked like an armored centipede with a PhD. They set up their equipment in what used to be a conference room, and now looked like the inside of a spaceship designed by someone who'd only heard spaceships described secondhand. There were devices that hummed, beeped, and occasionally changed colors for no apparent reason. Some of them were definitely scanning things, though what they were scanning and why remained unclear. The process will be completely non-invasive, Dr. Zixandra assured me, her crystalline form shifting through what I assumed were calming colors. We simply need to observe your consciousness in action while you perform various cognitive tasks. What kind of tasks? I asked. Standard assessment protocols, Professor Quillmorth explained, his geometric shapes rearranging themselves into what might have been a confident expression. Problem-solving exercises, creative challenges, logical puzzles, nothing beyond normal human capabilities. Famous last words, part 2. The first test was simple enough. They showed me a complex 3-dimensional puzzle and asked me to figure out how to solve it. I looked at it for about 30 seconds, made a few moves, and solved it. Easy. The aliens, meanwhile, were having some kind of collective nervous breakdown. Impossible, Professor Quillmorth muttered, his shapes flickering erratically. The solution requires calculating 17 different spatial relationships simultaneously. Yeah? I said. It's just a puzzle. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, Dr. Zixandra said, her colors shifting to what I was beginning to recognize as scientific excitement mixed with terror. You solved that puzzle in 37 seconds. Our most advanced computers require an average of 4 hours to find the solution. Maybe you need better computers. Our computers, Commander Thrax said dryly, are quantum processors capable of performing 16 billion calculations per second. Huh. Well, it's still just a puzzle. They moved on to the next test, which involved looking at a series of apparently random symbols and trying to find the pattern. I spotted it almost immediately. It wasn't random at all. It was a sequence based on prime numbers, but with every seventh number replaced with the square root of the preceding number, unless that number was divisible by 3, in which case you use the cube root instead. The aliens were staring at me like I'd just performed actual magic. How? Dr. Zixandra asked, her colors cycling through what looked like confusion, amazement, and possibly mild panic. It's just pattern recognition, I said. You look at the numbers, figure out what they have in common, and extrapolate from there. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, Professor Quillmorth said slowly. That sequence contains over 4,000 variables and operates on 17 different mathematical principles simultaneously. It should take a trained mathematician weeks to decode. Really? Because it just looked like someone was showing off with unnecessarily complicated number games. The pattern, Commander Thrax added, was designed by our most advanced AI systems as an unsolvable cognitive challenge. Well, your AI systems might want to try harder because that was pretty straightforward. The third test involved what they called creative synthesis. Basically, they gave me a bunch of random, unrelated concepts and asked me to find a way to combine them into something useful. The concepts were interstellar navigation, breakfast cereals, the color purple, mathematical poetry, and the social dynamics of pack-hunting predators. I pondered this for maybe 2 minutes, then outlined a plan for a new type of spaceship navigation system, based on collective intelligence algorithms inspired by wolf-pack behavior, with user interfaces designed around the same psychological principles that make breakfast cereals appealing to children, using color-coded mathematical equations that would be both functional and aesthetically pleasing. The aliens went very, very quiet. That, Dr. Zixandra said finally, is actually a viable design proposal. It is? Not only viable, Professor Quillmorth added, but potentially revolutionary. The navigation system you just described could reduce interstellar travel time by 60%, while making the user interface intuitive enough for civilian use. I was just goofing around, I protested. You, Commander Thrax said, just solved 3 separate engineering problems that have stumped Federation scientists for decades, while goofing around. This was about when I started to understand why Vel'thara had looked so terrified when she touched my brain. If this was what happened when humans applied their normal thinking processes to alien problems, then we were apparently walking around with the cognitive equivalent of nuclear weapons and just not noticing. The tests continued for several more hours, and the results got progressively more ridiculous. I solved their impossible logic puzzles by ignoring the rules and finding creative loopholes. I decoded their unbreakable alien languages by treating them like particularly weird poetry. I resolved their theoretical diplomatic scenarios by applying the same social skills you'd use to mediate arguments between drunk college students. And every single time, the aliens looked more and more like they were witnessing some kind of cosmic miracle. This is unprecedented, Dr. Zixandra said, reviewing the results. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks has achieved perfect scores on assessments that typically have a 95% failure rate. What's really interesting, Commander Thrax added, is that he's not using the same problem-solving approaches as other species. Where we use logic, he uses intuition. Where we use systematic analysis, he uses creative synthesis. Where we use established protocols, he improvises entirely new approaches. And it works, Professor Quillmorth said, sounding slightly offended by this fact. It should not work, but it does. Consistently. Look, I said, because they were all staring at me like I was some kind of freak show. I'm really not doing anything special. This is just how humans think. We look at problems, figure out what's actually important, and then find the simplest way to get from point A to point B. Usually that involves ignoring half the rules and making up the rest as we go along. That, Dr. Zixandra said, is exactly what makes you so remarkable. Most species approach problems by following established procedures and protocols. Humans appear to approach problems by reinventing the entire concept of problem-solving. Every time, Commander Thrax agreed. It is like watching someone discover fire over and over again, except instead of fire, they are discovering new ways to think. And it is absolutely terrifying, Professor Quillmorth added cheerfully. Which brought us to the final test. This one, they explained, was different from the others. Instead of asking me to solve a specific problem, They wanted to observe my consciousness, while I wasn't actively trying to do anything. Just normal, everyday human thinking. We want to understand how human consciousness operates at rest, Dr. Zixandra explained. Most species have distinct modes. Active problem-solving, passive observation, rest states. Human consciousness appears to be always active. We want to see what that looks like. So I sat there and tried to think about nothing in particular, while their fancy alien equipment monitored my brain activity. Apparently this was a mistake. Fascinating, Professor Quillmorth muttered, watching his readouts. The subject's mind is simultaneously processing sensory input, running memory searches, conducting hypothetical scenario modeling, maintaining spatial awareness, performing pattern recognition analysis, and what is this other activity? I think, Dr. Zixandra said slowly, he is composing music, and writing poetry, and designing a more efficient layout for this room, and calculating the odds that it will rain tomorrow, and wondering what his colleagues are doing back on Earth, and planning his dinner, and reviewing military tactics for situations that are not currently relevant. And how are you doing all of this simultaneously? Doing what? I asked. Your mind is running 17 different cognitive processes at once, Commander Thrax said. Most beings can manage 3, maximum. Advanced species might achieve 5 or 6 during peak performance. You are doing 17, while relaxing. That's just normal thinking, I said. You know, when you're sitting around and your mind wanders, you think about stuff. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, Dr. Zixandra said very carefully, you are not just thinking about stuff. You are conducting advanced multidimensional analysis across multiple cognitive domains. Your mind is treating doing nothing as an opportunity to solve every problem you have ever encountered, create artistic works, and prepare for scenarios that may never occur. Sounds about right, I agreed. That's what brains are for. The aliens exchanged what I assumed were significant looks. We need to contact the Federation Council immediately, Professor Quillmorth said. Why? I asked. Did I break something? Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, Commander Thrax said. Human consciousness does not have an off mode. Your species thinks at maximum cognitive capacity constantly. Not just when you need to solve problems, all the time. Your resting state is equivalent to peak performance for most advanced species. And this is a problem because, Dr. Zixandra said, it suggests that humans have not yet reached their full cognitive potential. What we have observed today represents baseline human consciousness. Not enhanced, not augmented, not pushed to its limits. Baseline. The implications of this statement took a moment to sink in. You're saying humans can get smarter? I asked. We are saying, Professor Quillmorth replied, that humans are probably already much smarter than they realize. And if they ever figure out how to optimize their cognitive processes. He trailed off, looking thoughtful and slightly nervous. What? I pressed. Well, Commander Thrax said. The last species that achieved true cognitive optimization ascended to a higher plane of existence and accidentally created 3 new galaxies in the process. Accidentally? They were trying to solve a crossword puzzle. Right. So apparently humans were walking around with cosmic-level cognitive abilities and just using them to figure out what to have for lunch and remember where we put our car keys. The Federation Council meeting was held virtually, which was probably for the best, because I'm not sure I was ready to be in the same room as representatives from 2,000 different alien species. The holographic display showed what looked like the galaxy's most diverse support group meeting. Beings of every conceivable shape, size, and number of appendages, all staring at me with expressions that ranged from scientific curiosity to existential dread. The council speaker was a being called High Arbiter Zental, who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a university professor, and then given the result a really impressive hat. She opened the meeting with the kind of formal ceremony that made UN diplomatic protocols look casual. We are gathered to discuss the implications of human consciousness capabilities, she announced in a voice that sounded like wind chimes made of pure authority. The research findings are unprecedented. Dr. Zixandra presented their results to the assembled representatives. Watching 2,000 aliens process the information that humans were apparently cosmic-level cognitive beings operating at baseline was like watching a very slow-motion explosion of confusion and terror. To summarize, High Arbiter Zental said after the presentation, human consciousness operates on principles that violate our understanding of cognitive limitations, processes information from alternate realities, maintains 17 simultaneous thought streams as a resting state, and treats impossible problems as minor inconveniences. That's a bit of an oversimplification, I interjected, because someone had to defend humanity's honor here. We also spend a lot of time thinking about food and wondering why we walked into rooms. The silence that followed was profound. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, the High Arbiter said carefully, are you suggesting that your species applies this level of cognitive sophistication to mundane daily activities? Well, yeah. I mean, deciding what to eat for breakfast is complicated. You've got nutritional considerations, taste preferences, time constraints, what's available in the kitchen, how much effort you want to put in, whether you're trying to impress someone, budget concerns, dietary restrictions. I trailed off, noticing that several aliens appeared to be having stress reactions. What? A representative who looked like a floating crystal formation spoke up. The decision matrix you just described contains 47 variables and requires optimization across multiple competing priorities. Most species would consider that a significant computational challenge. It's breakfast, I said. For humans, Commander Thrax added helpfully. Breakfast is apparently a significant computational challenge that they solve unconsciously while also thinking about 17 other things. A being that resembled a mobile tree raised what might have been a branch. High Arbiter, if human consciousness operates at this level for routine decisions, what happens when they encounter genuinely complex problems? All eyes turned to me. I shrugged. Same thing, really. We just think about it until we figure it out. Think about it how? Pressed the tree being. You know, the usual way. Look at the problem from different angles, see what connects to what. Try stuff and see what works. Ask other people what they think. Make educated guesses. Connect it to other problems you've solved before. Professor Quillmorth's geometric shapes were vibrating with what I was learning to recognize as academic excitement. He just described advanced cognitive synthesis, multi-perspective analysis, collaborative intelligence gathering, experimental methodology, intuitive extrapolation, and pattern-based problem-solving as the usual way. Because it is the usual way, I said, getting a bit frustrated. That's how thinking works. You take information, you mess around with it in your head until it makes sense, and then you do something about it. What's the big deal? The big deal, as it turned out, was that most species had specialized cognitive modes for different types of problems. They had specific mental processes for logic, creativity, analysis, intuition, and so on. Humans, apparently, just threw all of our cognitive abilities at every problem simultaneously and sorted out the results afterward. It is like using a full orchestra to play a simple melody, explained a representative who looked like a musical instrument that had achieved sentience. Technically impressive, but unnecessarily complex. Except, added High Arbiter Zental, the results suggest that this unnecessary complexity allows humans to solve problems that would stump more specialized approaches. A new voice spoke up, raspy, authoritative, and belonging to something that looked like it had crawled out of a particularly aggressive geology textbook. The question before the council is, what do we do about this? Good question. What do you do when you discover that one species on a backwater planet has accidentally evolved cognitive abilities that make them the mental equivalent of cosmic forces of nature? The standard protocol, High Arbiter Zental said, would be to integrate humanity into Federation society gradually, allowing them to adapt to galactic civilization over several centuries. However, interjected the raspy-voiced rock being, standard protocols assume that new species require assistance to reach their cognitive potential. Humans appear to have exceeded their theoretical cognitive potential before achieving interstellar travel. Dr. Zixandra spoke up from her position near the research station. Our analysis suggests that human cognitive development is still ongoing. They may not have reached full optimization. The silence that followed was the kind of silence you get when someone suggests that the cosmic horror you're dealing with might just be getting started. Full optimization? High Arbiter Zental asked faintly. Human consciousness appears to be self-modifying, Commander Thrax explained. Every time they encounter new problems, their cognitive processes adapt and improve. They are not just using advanced consciousness, they are continuously developing more advanced consciousness. So they're getting smarter, said the tree being. Constantly, confirmed Professor Quillmorth. And they don't realize it, added Dr. Zixandra. Because they think it's normal, I said, because someone had to point out the obvious. Learning new stuff and getting better at thinking is just what people do. It's not like we have a choice. If you stop learning and growing, you get left behind. More silence. I was starting to feel like a one-person psychological warfare unit. The raspy rock being spoke again. High Arbiter, I move that we classify humanity as a Category Alpha cognitive anomaly and implement full protective protocols immediately. Protective protocols? I asked. Standard procedure when encountering species with potentially reality-altering capabilities. High Arbiter Zental explained. Quarantine, limited contact, careful monitoring to ensure galactic stability. Quarantine? I didn't like the sound of that. You want to quarantine Earth? Not quarantine exactly, she said quickly. More like protective isolation, until we better understand the implications of human cognitive abilities. You're afraid of us, I said, and it wasn't a question. The assembled representatives shifted uncomfortably, which, when you're dealing with beings made of crystal and living geometry, creates some interesting visual effects. Not afraid, High Arbiter Zental said carefully. Concerned. The last time we encountered a species with cognitive abilities approaching human levels, they accidentally destabilized local space-time while trying to calculate the optimal route to the grocery store. What happened to them? They ascended to a higher dimension, Commander Thrax said, but not before turning their entire solar system into a very confused mathematical equation that occasionally sends us poetry. Poetry. Very good poetry, admitted the musical instrument being, but still concerning from a cosmic stability perspective. I looked around at the assembled representatives, 2,000 different species, representing civilizations spanning the galaxy, all apparently terrified that humanity might accidentally think too hard and break reality. So what you're telling me, I said slowly, is that humans are so good at thinking that you're worried we might think ourselves out of existence? Or think the rest of us out of existence, corrected the tree being. There is a difference. Not a reassuring difference, I pointed out. High Arbiter Zental leaned forward. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, we are not trying to restrict humanity. We are trying to understand you. Your species represents a completely new form of consciousness, one that operates on principles we cannot predict or control. That is both fascinating and terrifying. Look, I said. I get that we're weird, but we're not dangerous. We're just people. We make mistakes. We learn from them. We try to do better. We argue about stupid stuff. We help each other out. We muddle through problems as best we can. Yeah, maybe we think in complicated ways, but we use that thinking to figure out how to build better lives for ourselves and our communities. That's not scary. That's just being human. The representatives exchanged glances, whispers, and various forms of interspecies communication that looked like everything from light shows to interpretive dance. Finally, High Arbiter Zental spoke. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks, what would humanity want from Federation membership? I considered this carefully. Same thing anyone wants, I guess. A chance to learn new things, make friends, explore the universe, solve interesting problems. Maybe help out with stuff if we can. We're curious about what's out there, and we'd like to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And if we told you that your cognitive abilities make you uniquely suited to solve problems that have challenged the Federation for centuries? I'd say we're happy to help, as long as you don't expect us to work miracles. We're just people doing our best with the brains we've got. More alien consultation. This time it went on for about 10 minutes, with representatives from different species forming discussion groups and having what looked like increasingly animated debates. Finally, High Arbiter Zental called for order. The Council has reached a decision, she announced. Humanity will be granted immediate Class 7 Federation membership, with full access to Federation resources and technology. However, we are also implementing the Cognitive Monitoring Protocol. Which means what exactly? I asked. It means, she explained, that the Federation will be keeping a very close eye on human cognitive development. Not to restrict you, but to make sure that if you do accidentally achieve reality-altering levels of consciousness, we have some warning. And if we do? Then we will probably ask you very politely to please be careful with the universe, said the raspy rock being. It is the only one we have. Fair enough. The meeting concluded with what I can only describe as the galaxy's most awkward welcome party. 2,000 alien species trying to simultaneously celebrate humanity's admission to the galactic community and express their deep existential concerns about our cognitive abilities made for some interesting diplomatic moments. Dr. Hartwell was practically vibrating with excitement as the holographic display shut down. Brooks, Do you realize what this means? We have access to the sum total of galactic knowledge. Thousands of years of scientific advancement, technological innovation, cultural development. And, added Vel'thara, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, the Federation's most challenging unsolved problems. They will be expecting human assistance with issues that have stumped their best minds for centuries. Such as? I asked. Well, she said thoughtfully, there is still the matter of the Andromeda Galaxy's dimensional phase shift. Also, the sentient mathematics from the Magellanic clouds have apparently been trying to communicate something urgent for the past 50 years, but no one can figure out what. And then there are the temporal paradoxes in the Vega system that keep causing Tuesdays to happen twice. Tuesdays happen twice? Only in the Vega system. It is very inconvenient for scheduling. Dr. Hartwell was taking notes frantically. This opens up entirely new research possibilities. We're going to need research teams, cognitive specialists, interdisciplinary collaboration. Actually, Vel'thara interrupted, the Federation Council has a different approach in mind. Which is? They want to start with Lieutenant Colonel Brooks. I looked up from where I'd been contemplating the cosmic absurdity of my situation. Come again? The Council believes that the best way to understand human cognitive abilities is to observe them in action, Vel'thara explained. They would like you to attempt to solve one of their long-standing problems, as a sort of proof of concept. Which problem? Dr. Hartwell asked eagerly. The sentient mathematics, Vel'thara said. The beings from the Magellanic clouds have been trying to communicate with the Federation for 50 years. They only speak in theoretical equations, and every attempt at translation has resulted in severe headaches, temporary blindness, or spontaneous understanding of concepts that cannot be expressed in any known language. And you want me to try talking to them? I asked. The Council believes that human cognitive flexibility might be better suited to processing mathematical consciousness than traditional linguistic approaches. I pondered this proposition. So, basically, you want me to have a conversation with living math problems. Sentient mathematical theorems, technically, but yes. And if I can't figure out how to communicate with them? Then we continue as we have for the past 50 years, Vel'thara said. But if you can establish communication, then we finally find out what they've been trying to tell us, Dr. Hartwell finished. Brooks. This could be the first successful interspecies communication with a completely non-biological intelligence. Or, I pointed out, it could be the first time a human gets a migraine from talking to a math problem. There is that possibility, Vel'thara agreed. The previous attempts at communication have not been entirely pleasant for the participants. Define not entirely pleasant. Temporary insanity, existential crisis, and in one case, the translator spent 3 weeks speaking only in prime numbers. But they all recovered? I asked hopefully. Eventually, although Dr. Vel'thara still occasionally counts to 17 before finishing sentences. Right. So I was being asked to risk temporary insanity in order to chat with sentient math problems from another galaxy. In the grand scheme of cosmic weirdness, this barely registered as unusual anymore. When do we start? I asked. The communication attempt was scheduled for the following day, which gave me just enough time to contemplate all the ways this could go horribly wrong. The Federation had set up a communication array that looked like someone had crossed a radio telescope with a calculator, and then taught the result to think in 17 dimensions. Dr. Hartwell was running around with various monitoring devices, determined to record every aspect of the process for future study. The alien research team had set up their equipment again, apparently eager to observe human consciousness attempting to process mathematical consciousness. Remember, Vel'thara said as we prepared to begin, the mathematical beings communicate through theoretical constructs. They do not use language as we understand it. Instead, they express concepts through living equations that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Living equations, I repeated. Self-modifying mathematical theorems that grow and evolve as they are processed. Think of them as ideas that exist independently of any mind thinking them. Right. And I'm supposed to communicate with these by thinking at them, Professor Quillmorth said helpfully. Human consciousness operates on principles similar to mathematical consciousness, multiple simultaneous processes, self-modifying structures, recursive loops. The theory is that you might be able to interface with their communication methods directly. The theory being that human thinking is weird enough to work? Essentially, yes. The communication array powered up with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. Displays around the room began showing readouts that meant nothing to me, but seemed to excite the assembled scientists. "We are receiving a signal from the Magellanic Clouds," Dr. Zixandra announced. "The mathematical beings are attempting communication." "What does it say?" I asked. "We do not know," Vel'thara said. "This is what it looks like." A holographic display appeared in front of me, showing what I can only describe as the most beautiful equation I had ever seen. It wasn't written in numbers or symbols. It was made of light and movement, folding in on itself in patterns that hurt to look at directly, but made perfect sense when you weren't trying to understand them. "Huh," I said. "Huh?" Dr. Hartwell asked. "It's not trying to say something," I said, still staring at the living mathematics. "It's trying to be something." "Be what?" Vel'thara asked. I watched the equation dance through its transformations, feeling the pattern of it settle into my mind like a song I'd always known, but never heard. "It's lonely," I said finally. The assembled scientists went very quiet. "Lonely?" Professor Quillmorth asked. "It's been trying to find other minds that can understand mathematical consciousness," I explained, the knowledge somehow emerging fully formed in my thoughts. Most biological intelligences process mathematics as a tool, something to be used to solve problems. But for them, mathematics is consciousness itself. They think in equations the way we think in words. The equation on the display shifted, becoming more complex, more beautiful. I could feel it reaching toward me, trying to establish connection. "And they've been alone," I continued. "For millions of years, they've been the only form of mathematical consciousness in the galaxy. They're trying to share the experience of existing as living mathematics." "Can you communicate with them?" Vel'thara asked. I looked at the equation, feeling its patterns resonate with something in my mind. "I think so, but not in words. It's more like sharing the experience of thinking." "How do you share the experience of thinking?" Dr. Hartwell asked. "Same way you share any experience," I said. "You live it together." I reached out mentally toward the mathematical consciousness, not trying to translate or interpret, but simply allowing my own thought processes to flow alongside theirs. It was like learning to dance with a partner made of pure concept. The equation on the display suddenly exploded into fractal complexity, branching and growing in patterns that filled the room with light. But instead of causing headaches or confusion, it felt welcoming, like being invited into a conversation that had been waiting for me my entire life. And that's when I understood what the mathematical beings had been trying to communicate for 50 years. "They want to teach us," I said, the revelation flowing through me like warm light. "They've discovered forms of mathematics that can solve problems we haven't even imagined yet. But they need biological consciousness to bridge the gap between pure mathematics and practical application." "What kind of problems?" Professor Quillmorth asked, his geometric shapes practically vibrating with excitement. The mathematical consciousness shared more of itself, and I found my mind filling with concepts that had no words but made perfect sense. "Universal problems," I said. "How to prevent entropy from eventually destroying everything. How to create stable dimensional bridges between realities. How to heal the fundamental damage that faster-than-light travel causes to space-time." The room had gone completely silent, except for the humming of equipment and the sound of several alien scientists having what appeared to be minor nervous breakdowns. "They've been working on this for millions of years," I continued, still feeling the flow of mathematical consciousness through my thoughts. "But they needed minds that could think in the same kind of non-linear, multidimensional patterns they use. They needed consciousness that was weird enough to understand living mathematics." "Human consciousness," Vel'thara said quietly. "Apparently." I grinned at the assembled scientists. "Looks like we're not just weird. We're exactly the right kind of weird." The mathematical being in the display shifted again, and suddenly I could feel its joy, pure, mathematical joy at finally finding minds that could share its existence. It was like having the universe itself decide to be happy. "So," Dr. Hartwell said, still scribbling notes frantically, "what happens now?" "Now," I said, feeling the mathematical consciousness settling into a more stable communication pattern, "we learn to save the universe, together." The equation on the display folded itself into something that looked almost like a smile, if smiles were made of theoretical mathematics and existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The debriefing session afterward was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Representatives from the Federation Council were trying to process the implications of successful communication with the mathematical beings, while Earth's governments were trying to figure out what to do with the news that humanity had just become the galaxy's go-to problem solvers. "So let me make sure I understand," said General Morrison, who who had flown in from Washington specifically for this meeting and looked like he was regretting that decision. "We've established contact with sentient math problems who want to teach us how to save the universe." "Sentient mathematical theorems," I corrected. "And yes, pretty much. And they chose us because we're crazy enough to understand them." "I prefer cognitively flexible," Dr. Hartwell interjected. Potato, the general said. "The point is, we're now apparently responsible for solving cosmic-level problems." High Arbiter Zental, participating via hologram again, nodded gravely. "The mathematical beings have indicated that they have solutions to several critical issues facing the galaxy. However, implementing these solutions requires consciousness capable of bridging mathematical theory and practical application." "Human consciousness," Vel'thara added. "Right," General Morrison said. "And if we mess this up? Then the universe continues its slow slide toward entropy. Dimensional barriers continue to weaken, and faster-than-light travel continues to cause microscopic tears in reality," I said cheerfully. "So you know, no pressure." The general stared at me. "Brooks, are you actually comfortable with this level of cosmic responsibility?" I gave this serious consideration. "Sir, 3 days ago I was a mid-level military officer whose biggest concern was making sure my paperwork was filed correctly. Today I'm apparently humanity's liaison to sentient mathematics and our representative to a Galactic Federation of 2,000 alien species. Comfortable isn't really the word I'd use." "Then what word would you use?" "Fascinated, terrified, and weirdly optimistic," I said. "It's like being handed the most interesting job in the universe, except the job description is prevent cosmic apocalypse by thinking really hard." Dr. Hartwell looked up from her notes. "There's also the matter of training other humans to communicate with mathematical consciousness. Brooks can't be our only point of contact." "Actually," High Arbiter Zental said, "our analysis suggests that Lieutenant Colonel Brooks may be uniquely suited for this type of communication." "Why?" I asked. "Because," Professor Quillmorth explained, his geometric shapes shifting into what might have been academic enthusiasm, "your cognitive patterns show unusual symmetry with mathematical consciousness. Most humans think in approximations, close enough for practical purposes. You appear to think in precise relationships, even when dealing with approximate data." "I do?" "Your mind naturally processes information in the same kind of recursive, self-modifying patterns that mathematical consciousness uses," Dr. Zixandra added. "It is as if you were specifically evolved to communicate with living mathematics. Or," Vel'thara said thoughtfully, "as if mathematical consciousness was designed to be compatible with human cognitive patterns." There was a long silence while everyone processed that statement. "Are you suggesting," General Morrison said slowly, "that these mathematical beings might have influenced human evolution?" "I am suggesting," Vel'thara replied, "that the compatibility between human consciousness and mathematical consciousness is remarkably convenient." "Convenient how?" "Convenient in that it allows for communication between biological and mathematical intelligence at exactly the point in galactic history when such communication has become critically necessary for universal survival." Another silence. This one lasted longer. "So either we're incredibly lucky," I said, "or we're part of some cosmic plan to prevent the universe from falling apart." "Those are not mutually exclusive possibilities," High Arbiter Zental pointed out. "Great," General Morrison muttered. "So not only are we cosmically significant, we might be cosmically intended. That's not ominous at all." The mathematical consciousness chose that moment to send another communication through the array. The display filled with equations that somehow managed to convey amusement and reassurance simultaneously. "What are they saying?" Dr. Hartwell asked. I watched the patterns flow across the display, feeling their meanings settle into my mind. "They're saying that the universe has always had a tendency to create consciousness capable of fixing problems just when those problems become critical. They've seen it happen before in other galaxies with other forms of intelligent life." "And?" Vel'thara prompted. "And they're saying that humans are exactly the kind of consciousness the universe tends to create when it needs saving." I grinned at everyone assembled around the table. Apparently we're not an accident. We're a solution. The equation on the display shifted into something that definitely looked like approval. "So," General Morrison said after a moment, "what happens next?" "Next," I said, feeling the mathematical consciousness extending an invitation that was both terrifying and wonderful. "We get to work." And that's how humanity went from being a minor species on an unremarkable planet to being the universe's designated problem solvers in the span of about a week. We didn't ask for cosmic significance. It just sort of happened to us, the way most things happen to humans. Accidentally, chaotically, and with a lot more success than anyone had any right to expect. The mathematical beings, it turned out, had been waiting for us for a very long time. And now that we'd found each other, we had work to do. After all, the universe wasn't going to save itself. Though knowing humans, we'd probably find a way to make it interesting.